Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Franchise Advisory Board, where we bring in experts from around the franchise community to help you build a long-lasting, thriving, memorable franchise brand that can help your franchisees find true success. Now, I've got with me a friend of mine, Alan Lasky, Dr. Lasky, to embarrass him just a little bit. He doesn't love it when we say that. But Alan's he's the SVP of Reliable Background Screening. If you haven't met them yet, you probably want to know them. But let me tell you a little bit about Alan and why I've got him here. Because today we're going to talk about uh, how do you how do you manage risk in the hiring process using AI tools and all these different things will help you prevent deep fakes and all these things that are starting to rise up with AI being used nefariously. But the reason why Alan's here is he's got almost a quarter of a century of experience in the background screening space. He's got a doctorate in clinical psychology. He's been consulted with. He consulted the Pentagon as they were trying to build up their civilian background screening process. So there isn't anybody I've ever met in my life that would be better to talk about this than Alan. But at Reliable Background Screening, which is a top tier screening tool, is used for both employee screening and also franchise candidate screening. So it kind of touches both elements of what we touch as well at ClientTether. But they've got some incredible tools now that they've developed that I think are going to help you understand why it's important to keep track of what the AI trends are on the nefarious side, so you can counteract that in candidate screening and in employee screening. Now, Alan, one last thing I got to tell you about Alan, because it's super cool. He was actually a music writer at one point, and he almost closed a deal with the Jacksons to pick up one of the songs that he wrote. So, Alan, thank you for joining us. Tell us
Thank
a little
you.
bit more about you. Tell us about reliable background screening before we jump into the topic.
Sure. Yes. Something also so I came from a franchise family of 40 years
Mhm.
in a multi-store franchise, and I worked there during college. So I had that experience culturally of working for years in franchising, besides my education and experience in background screening. I've worked at different firms over the last 20 plus years, and have always focused on hospitality and franchising. And now with the firm I'm with, we heavily focus on franchise. And more than ever, with all the trends and compliance issues that we see, especially now with AI and deep fakes and security, remote hiring, multi-state with multi-unit, there's a new complexity, as you all know, with all the laws and regulations. And so it's great talking about it and talking about tools and how to reduce it, which is what we like doing and helping out. And what you do also with automation is so important today to reduce risk and standardize the process,
Right.
with a complement to what we do.
Oh yeah. And the crazy thing I've seen, Alan, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I've heard of and seen why the technology would do this. You can actually create and reinforce bias in your hiring and screening process accidentally with AI. And I mean, yeah, let's start with that for a minute, because I feel
Sure.
like the hiring process, the screening process, the franchise candidate selection process,
Mhm.
mission critical that we keep that as unbiased as possible for liability reasons, right? And also because we want to get the right people in, regardless of background, sexual preference, gender, race,
Right.
whatever, right? Like this shouldn't matter.
It
So
should.
tell me, how are you seeing AI inadvertently create bias sometimes in the
Yeah.
hiring process if used wrong?
Absolutely. So if we start off with who the regulators are in our industry, right, as a consumer, whenever you're doing a consumer report, so any candidate you have, whether it's for a franchisee, or it's an employee at a franchise location, it's still a consumer report, and it's under the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Mhm.
Besides them, you also have the EEOC. So you have those three agencies heavily regulating to make sure there is non-bias and accuracy. Under us as a consumer reporting agency, we're under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and that act states that you have to have the most accurate information and take every possible measure to reduce risk of something being a false positive. And so with that, right, we now have AI exploding everywhere, and people wanting to use it. In fact, some of the statistics are that more than 50% of employers are now using AI in their recruiting efforts. And supposedly, in a LinkedIn survey recently, 93% of recruiters are saying that they're increasing their usage this year. So on that level, you have this explosion, but yet you don't have the regulation. It's still the wild, wild west because it's growing so quickly. And the problem is that depending on what AI you're using and how you're using it and how it's tracked or measured, it could provide biased information without you even knowing it.
Hmm.
In many ways. I mean, one way is that, with, an ADA issue of someone's tick or someone with the way that they speak. Other ways of seeing information about, again, that would be an EEOC issue of discrimination based on a certain race or gender. So it's just really, really important to reduce risk by making sure to take measures that there's no bias.
Mm. Yeah. Well, and let's talk about that a little bit. So,
Mhm.
AI, it just does what we tell it to do, right? It
Right.
does what we train it to do. And how are you seeing? There are a lot of trends and there's risk management that we've got to put into place as AI can be. And I want to be careful. We're not here to dog on AI in the hiring process.
No,
We're here to
oh,
promote the
definitely
idea.
not.
Like it absolutely should be embraced. So, but let's talk a little bit about what are some of the most important trends going on today,
Uh-huh.
aside that people have to be paying attention to, and how AI
Absolutely.
should be leveraged.
Absolutely. So, and it's worth mentioning there are 20 bills or more than 20 bills out right now or going into law, with about 6 states already enacting laws about AI use. And there's a fight between the federal government and the states and municipalities about how it's, we don't want to stifle, as you said, we don't want to stifle innovation, but at the same time, there has to be some rules around it.
Yeah.
There are tools and techniques that a company can use that should be enacted. A lot of the rules that we're seeing overall, what they're talking about in the laws is that you want to make sure that there's no discrimination practices, that there's a human element to, even if you're using somebody else's AI, make sure that there's some human element reviewing the information before it's going in for your decision-making process. And you want to be transparent with the candidate that you are using AI. There's already some case law about it, about the AI attendant that takes notes while you're talking on something like a Zoom call. You want to make sure that everyone knows that that's going on and taking those notes, especially if it's during hiring. So it's those types of things that you want to watch out first. And then there's a lot of tools that you can use to reduce risk, such as if you're doing interviews, do in-person interviews and skills assessment in person if you can. If it's remote, then just make sure that you maybe are using a non-bias AI checking program, because there are those programs out there. Also set up guidelines for your interview of what's acceptable or not acceptable for AI use by your candidates.
Mhm.
Make sure you train your whole team that may be doing the interviewing in the same way of what to look out for discrepancies. And then you do, coming from what we do, you want to make sure that you do a thorough background check. And there are new tools now that are biometric, non-biased, that are looking for discrepancies to make sure that you don't have any deep fakes as well. So those are a lot of the ways that you can reduce risk. And also understanding, work with your legal on in the states that you're in to make sure that you're covering the laws that may already be
Mhm.
applied for AI.
Yeah, I love these. I want to break down a couple of these if you don't
Please.
mind, Alan,
Yeah, absolutely.
because a couple of them stood out to me. One, creating guidelines for candidates on how AI can be used in their application process.
Uh-huh.
That's something that, so I've got a couple of my older boys that have been looking for jobs currently or recently, and there are assessments and tests and things that you're trying to figure out, like, hey, is this how smart or capable or how does this person think?
Right.
And if you got candidates using AI to crack those questions, like you'll have a bunch of perfect applicants come through. You have no
Right.
idea. So I can see the issue is it doesn't matter how smart you are with AI. We're trying to figure out you, Alan Lasky,
Right.
Dr. Alan Lasky, like how capable are you as a human of doing this task, not how capable are you of using AI to get the job done.
Right. And
Yeah.
I always equate it to, like, when sports, let's just take football, right? Years ago, when people started using a lot of steroids, to compete against the steroids, you have to take steroids if
Uh-huh.
you want to compete in that sport. Very similar to AI, where so what we know by statistics, SHRM and Forbes reported that 70% of candidates misrepresent themselves on their resumes. And there's a new term that's now being used in recruitment called resume inflation. And that's just because of the fact that candidates are, throwing it through AI, saying, enhance me to be the number one candidate. And if they're not careful and they're not vetting that information to truly be who they are, it's fraudulent. So, it's, they can say it's enhanced, but it's really fraudulent. So it's extremely important for candidates to take the time and care to be who they truly are, but also recruiters or whoever's hiring, whether it's a franchisee or, again, an employee for a franchise, to look at all the variables to really understand who the person is, do verifications, primary source verifications on who that person is. Again, any in-person information is really helpful. It's okay to be used, but you can also put in your policies about how much can be used and let the candidate know it during their process. It's okay to use AI, but we are going to check to make sure that this is you, which again provides a little regulation to them that there will be an audit, which may reduce the likelihood of them being fraudulent.
I like that. So giving the candidates guidelines for using AI, but also notifying them that you will do primary record validation.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, were you the one telling me about the guy that, dude, I was just talking to someone about this, where his friend, like their friend bought,
It's me. It was
was it
me.
you
Yeah.
that,
So look,
tell us that
in my
story.
own family, a franchise owner, a new franchisee was taking over after 40 years, our company business, our franchise business, when my father was retiring or the family was deciding not to move on. And corporate recommended this person without enough vetting. And this person came in, closed the store, sold everything in the store, and disappeared. Upon further research later, they found that if a credit check would have been done on this franchisee, they would have found that this person was not a good candidate. So I can't emphasize enough on how important screening and standardization is, and doing the right searches comprehensively to make sure that you have the right candidate, or it can really cost you. Also, just, even more so, there was another story too, where, some franchisees in an organization, if they're not vetted and do harm and it makes the news anywhere, affects, of course, the whole brand, right? It tarnishes the brand. And when a customer or the public see the brand, they're not looking at you as a franchisee. They're looking at the brand, thinking that the brand is tarnished, which really is sad because, again, it could be just one bad apple. So, I can't stress enough that the comprehensive, appropriate screening for the position that you have, whether it's a franchisee or an employee at a franchise, is crucial to do, as well as standardizing the program through, automated means to help reduce risk.
Let me ask you a question about that,
Sure.
because clearly I don't disagree at all. And in fact, multi-unit franchise owner in our own family, right? Amy and I sold those a year ago.
Uh-huh.
But I can see the negative impact personally on, like, if you bring in the wrong people, not just like someone who's not quite qualified, but I mean like some real shysters.
Uh-huh.
The question I've got, though, is there are a lot of people that have come to this country, and I don't mean this to, boy, this is going to sound bad. Like, I want to make sure this doesn't come across the wrong way, guys. But
Yeah.
Alan, like, there are a lot of people here. They're like first generation immigrants that have a completely different moral code, ethical code than you or I who've grown up in this country. And
Sure.
by the way, the gringo moral code, the United States moral code tends to be fairly high compared to most of the
It
world.
does. It
Um,
does.
but how do you guys compensate, or how does background screening work when they don't have a whole lot of like work history, background history that's in the United States? How well do these tools work now to find their records or their experience, their background in other countries they've lived in before?
The US and Canada has the best background screening process, even though it's still antiquated because it's not centralized, meaning that there's court records in federal, in county, and state. It's kind of all over the place, and you got to create a comprehensive package. But in the US, we're able to do that. In most countries, and I used to be in charge of South America for a former firm of understanding how they conduct screening, it's very antiquated in most cases. It could be in the downstairs cellar in a cabinet of the records, not even digitized. And they can decide to give it to you or not to give it to you. And the time length is a lot longer. So it is harder to get information, even education or employment verifications internationally. So you do have to put your best foot forward of doing more skills assessment. Again, any type of verification you can do, even to get an education verification that's equivalent to the US, and maybe an employment if possible. And then just to look at the skills assessment of that individual to make sure that they can match that job and that things do line up to what they say what they've done and what they actually have done, to spend a little more time looking at that to make sure you have the right candidate if they're coming in internationally. It is really important because it's handled totally different and it's not as much of a priority in other countries.
Yeah,
So it's a good point.
yeah, and I know right now in the U.S., like E2 visas, they've really clamped down on a lot of that.
Right.
Good news, bad news, right?
Right.
I want to be careful as a country we don't become xenophobes. That is not who we are.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, immigration has fueled our growth since our founding, so we've got to be cautious. But I do know some people have been really burned by folks who just come over that are bad actors, but there's no history of their bad acting. So thanks for sharing some insights there. Real skills assessments. I mean, reference checks are hard because it's easy to grab Uncle Vinny and Cousin Bobby and then, and pretend. I'm curious about your feedback about that as well, because it's really like the human element, like doing live interviews in
Yeah.
person, or live Zooms with the person, having them verify ID. Like there are some best practices I know around that we can do, but like what else would you recommend
Well,
to
yeah,
help?
but it's important to go over statistics of what you're saying. So supposedly, Gartner did a study, and by 2028, 1 out of 4 job applicants are expected to be fake.
Holy
One
smokes.
out of four, and that 25%. That's basically 25% of candidate profiles fraudulent. And when we're talking about deep fakes, it's another concern. So our industry has created now a new product that is an identity verification check. So because of technology, thankfully, we're able to start a background check to where the candidate gets a mobile device friendly email. They will upload their ID, and then they have to take a video of themselves, and it tells them when to blink, when to turn their head, to then biometrically match that information to make sure that you have the correct person. And then to look at the data to make sure that they don't hedge the data or augment it in a way that works for them, like changing their date of birth. So because we need all that information to make sure that we have the right individual, that while also being sensitive to EEOC factors, right? About any types of discrimination. So how it's used is behind the scenes and kept behind the scenes by the screening firm, just looking to make sure things match.
Mhm.
That's really the new way, besides verifications, that we're going to catch any individual. Amazon said that there were North Korean hackers trying to work in their IT, over 1,000 applicants, well over 1,000 applicants that were all, again, not real. So if you are hiring, let's say, an IT person remotely, make sure, especially if they're out of the country or saying that they're in the country, that you do some screening on them to make sure that you have someone who's protecting your business and not trying to hurt it.
Wow. Yeah, especially, I mean, so many businesses run remote now for like
Right.
support staff, home office,
Support
franchise
staff.
staff. We do, right? Like our company is 100%
Right.
remote. So, yeah, it's something that's been on our mind a lot too is that, some of the firms we work with, deep background screening, we're very confident there, but I'm gonna have to do an audit with all of our partners to make sure they're following the best practices because a lot of these folks are really talented and they've added a real value to the company. So we can't stop it, and that's not what we're advocating for here, but using technology to prevent the deep fakes, to prevent the false applicants. That stat of 1 in 4 will be fake. I remember, I mean, years ago, like when we would now we just recruit people, but we used to open up on Indeed, and
Right.
I would reach out to 20 people maybe and be like, hey, we'd like to do a screening interview. 4 would respond.
Right.
They weren't, I don't think they were deep, they weren't faking, but they were also like just checking boxes for unemployment or something. So I
Right.
mean, but this has become a lot more insidious where people are pretending to be someone so they can get a
They are.
job. And yeah, it's
They
crazy.
are. And then they're trying to hurt the firm by stealing, information. And so it's crucial now to make sure to reduce risk by, again, making sure you screen them very well and that you are matching information, especially if they're remote, because it is happening now, and these these studies and these statistics are staggering of where this is going.
Mhm. Well, so let's take a step back for a second. With our deep fakes,
Mhm.
or the applicants that have used, they're so inflated that it's pretty much deceitful. What are some of the things that you guys see? Like I'm because there's like the AI that can catch things, but also like humans should be able to see and spot some of these things. Like what are some of the trends there
Sure.
that people are using to falsify and inflate their resumes to try to get jobs right now? What are the
Right.
trends?
Well, yeah, part of it is to start, you're right, starts with the resume to make sure that they're not inflating their resume and that things match. Because AI can only do, AI goes by statistics still. So, some say that, it's fairly accurate because it's pulling information. It isn't. It actually lies to itself based on statistics. So it may only be 10% accurate of what it's reporting. So, a candidate who's, especially a younger candidate who may just throw it through AI, thinks that, hey, it's enhanced, it's still correct. If they're not going through it, you want to look for the inconsistencies it's not catching, because a lot of times AI won't catch certain things. So you want to get someone on your staff or yourself that's detail oriented to really make sure that everything is consistent. And then you want to have an interview after you review their information to see if they say the same thing, whether it's about a video interview or a live, which live is better, but if it has to be by video, read off things and see how fast they get back to you on the remarks that you say. So how long were you working at that firm? I can't remember now. You'll catch them in a whole bunch of um, either falsehoods or delays in their responses that are significant.
Hmm.
Some people have an impediment of where they may delay things just because that's the way they speak. You'll pick that up based on the intonation of who they are. But
Yep.
you can catch some inconsistencies or the lack of comfort when you start questioning the resume to what they're saying they do. I would also recommend a skills assessment survey where it's
Mhm.
being videoed or monitored to make sure that they're not, again, using AI or their phone to fill in that skills assessment of whatever you need from them,
Mhm.
because you can still have them on video if they're not in person. Those are ways to definitely reduce risk. And again, if you have other staff doing your hiring, make sure you train them the same way to look for those inconsistencies and to
Yeah.
call them out.
How often, I mean, one of the things I do, the first thing, I don't know why I've always done this, but when somebody sends in their resume, I instantly like side by side it with their social profile on LinkedIn. And it's not because I distrust people. I just am curious, like, oh, how well does this align with
Right.
I don't, and do people tend to be more honest on their resume or on their LinkedIn profile? Like, what do you find?
Usually on their LinkedIn profile, because they haven't changed it yet. When they're going after a job, they're really focused on the resume, so they'll throw it through. They won't throw, although LinkedIn now has their own AI, right, that will help you write your stuff, which again can inflate what you're getting. Although they're supposedly controlling that from LinkedIn. So it is important to look at, like you said, LinkedIn, as well as what is on their resume, as opposed, and also what they talk about in their interview.
Mhm.
Match those three things up. The other point that you brought up, which is really important, is social media searches. So we do social media searches. This is becoming very tricky, right? Because we know that, again, I think it's 70+% of organizations use social media to look up their candidates.
Mhm.
It, understandably. The
Yeah.
problem with that, right, is the ADA and EEOC issues you may see by doing that. If the candidate knows that you look them up, and then they can use that in court with a private attorney or a class action, saying you're looking at people's profiles that could provide discrimination. We have, screening firms have, such as us, a social media search where we filter out only what you should see, but we're keeping you clear of ADA and EEOC issues. So we're filtering out, we're showing you things like violence or, any discrimination or drug, anything that's active drug use that they're showing. We can then provide that information only, and it's all public information to protect you. The other big issue that we see going on right now too is people Googling people.
Mhm.
Now, why is that so important? In our industry, the trends have also turned to something called ban the box and clean slate laws. And what that is that you can't ask about a person's criminal past in over 36 states and 150 municipalities based on you have to wait till a conditional job offer is made or longer to even ask them. That's number one. Number two, that there are restrictions of what you can and cannot do. And that's now turned into something called clean slate, where states are redacting and expunging information after a certain period of time because a third of the US adult population has an arrest. So when you're talking about that high of an amount of population, states are now reducing the barrier to entry for someone who may have had a misdemeanor 7 years ago by removing it completely. So if you're Googling someone and find a case and say, we're not going to hire this person because of this case, that case may not even be on their record anymore. And if it's a savvy candidate, they're going to ask you why they didn't get hired. And if they do find out you used information that's not reportable anymore, that becomes a lawsuit.
Wow.
Again, why you want to standardize things through automation with what you do, right, Dave, and also what we do to keep it standardized, automated, and then you reduce your risk.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in the past, I've actually I Google everybody, and that it comes.
You're not alone.
And it's not. I guess it's not the fact that I'm Googling people that's incorrect, but it's that if I'm seeing something or making a judgment call about whether or not they're qualified to continue in the interview process based
Right.
upon biased perceptions of what's going on. But I will be honest, like I find it's a pretty good character background check, right? Like what are people putting out in their personal feed?
Right.
If I see somebody like posting a bunch of racist stuff, like ain't no way I'd ever hire that human
Exactly.
in my
Exactly.
company, right? Like,
You'd want to
but
document that
yeah,
information too. Social media search is allowed by the FTC to be used as long as it's used appropriately. So
okay,
the same thing, believe it or not, with a motor vehicle report. Even if they don't drive for you, it says a lot about a person's character if they have 4 DUIs and 3 failure to appear in courts. So
yeah,
you really want to just get a comprehensive view of who that individual is when you're bringing them on, because again, it's like insurance. You want to make sure to reduce your risk of that person hurting your organization or starting and then leaving, and then you having to spend money again to get somebody else in. So, it's just really a question of doing your homework up front and also just looking at this new trend of technology, which is great, an enhancement for us, but it's also a hindrance because the laws aren't moving as fast as the technology is. So it gets confusing about in the gray areas of what laws are today may not be in a year from now. So we all need to keep up with it.
yeah, agreed. It feels like we probably ought to do a webinar about this at some point, or you ought to, right? Just to like educate people about this because I think it's a big
Absolutely.
gray area that most people do, not knowing that it could be used against them.
Right. And right now we have Colorado, California, Illinois, New Jersey, and New York City that all have laws restricting AI in one way or most of them again are saying you have to have a policy in place, make sure it's non-discriminatory and show us that you have done that. Even if you have a supplier or contractor that's using it, make sure it's your responsibility if you're using it that it's not discriminatory and that you should have a human element reviewing that information, and you should be open and honest with your candidates that you're using AI.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's where the laws are right now. And again, there's 20, like I said, there's 20 other bills or enacted laws going on right now that are going to be added to that besides federal looking at making restrictions or enhancements.
Wow. Yeah, that's super useful. And I think anybody who's listening, franchise development best practices, like it's just as restrictive, right? You just
Right.
decide not to award somebody a franchise because of one of these things. You've used AI and they didn't know it, or the AI has been biased, or you weren't careful enough in your social media search and you inserted bias in the process. Like that's now another potential lawsuit.
There
So
is. And another important piece just to bring up, because we always bring this up and we're always educating about this, is that part of our federal laws, anytime you do a consumer report on anybody, as part of the federal law, you've got to give them a right to dispute information for a false positive.
mhm.
It's called adverse action. And you'd want to talk to your background screening firm about it because you want to make sure you give them at least a right to dispute what you found, because it may not be them, or they may have a reason that they may have some kind of information for you that may, for instance, we've seen one candidate have a twin use their information. And so that, again, because that candidate disputed it and that was found out, the report was updated. So it's just really important to give them the chance to dispute that information to make sure it is that person.
When I was in just wrapping up college, I got a phone call from a collection agency, and they confirmed my name, and we started talking. Like, now you owe us a bunch of money for this medical bill, this dermatology clinic, and I was like, dude, I'm like
What?
23 years old, like great skin. Like, I've never been into a dermatologist in my life. Well, as it
Right.
turns out, there are probably 100 people who live 20 miles away from me or less that have the same name as I do where I live in Utah, and I didn't know any of them. And so I'm guessing there was some sort of a medical record mix up. Maybe the same umbrella organization had crossed records or something in their Epic system. But anyway, yeah, there I had to dispute that one, and
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the same thing because understand a lot of the information from our industry comes from credit header information when we start a search to see where they've lived or alias names they've used. And that could be, again, mistyped by TransUnion, Experian, Equifax, or in the databases that our industry uses. Courts have information wrong at the courthouses, especially with their furloughs and government shutdowns and morale issues at courts, or if they're backlogged. So it's just really important to give them the right to dispute that information. You can still make your decision after that, but there's a whole process that we talk about that, again, your firm should help out with that as we do to support our clients.
Okay. And that, by the way, now you got me really curious about, we're talking about liability here in the hiring
Right.
process. So how do you do that delicate dance? So if somebody says, "Hey, why didn't you hire me?" or you see something that's adverse inside of a background check, is it your responsibility as the employer to then bring it forward to the candidate and be like, "Hey, FYI, we can't proceed because,"
So
or that feels
good
like a
question.
liability problem starting to
So
fester?
there are certain states now, like Illinois and California, that mandate that you tell them exactly what the reasons were that you were potentially not moving forward with them and how it relates to the job. So that's become very specific over the last 5 years. Most states don't. They say that you don't have to you just have to give them the right to dispute because you're giving them what we ended up doing as a process. We give them a copy of the report, their rights, because there's a federal rights document that we give them, and also a adverse form that says, hey, if you have any discrepancy on this report because potentially we're not hiring you, contact your background screening firm, our background screening firm.
Okay.
So in this case, we at Reliable would get a phone call from a candidate saying, I'm trying to work for ABC firm and I'm disputing what's on my report. And then we start a ticket to look into it immediately and to notify and communicate to the firm as well as the individual when it's resolved. If it is them and they've done some kind of violent crime and it is job related, it doesn't matter. They're not going to get hired. I mean, that
Mhm.
you can make an honest decision based on that and it'll hold up in court. You just want to make sure it's job related because and the severity of it and how long ago it occurred. So you want to really give that individual a right to dispute anything. But again, it's your decision at the end of the day. But again, it has become more sophisticated with state laws
Mhm.
requiring certain things.
Love it. Well, that's something I did not know. So that does feel like the neutral ground then. So the best practice is you do a background check on any candidate, whether it's a franchise candidate or you're talking about an employee. Something comes up that's a red flag, but generally speaking, you just provide a copy of that background check to every candidate. With neutrality, say, hey, here's the background check. Let us know if there's anything that doesn't seem right or that you feel like is grossly inaccurate. And then it's really not on you
Right.
as
It,
long as you're making decisions based upon real data and you gave them a
right.
chance to dispute anything that doesn't seem accurate.
Right. So, I mean, if you're
Okay.
going to hire the individual, you don't have to give them a copy of their report. There are certain states that during the background screening process, because we do ours electronically for the most part, they can click a box like in California or Minnesota that allows them to get a copy of the report, which is a box that's required by state. Most states don't require it, but if they do ask for a copy of the report, we're still giving them a copy of the report. If they're going to get hired, they usually don't care, right? So the
Yeah.
majority of candidates, if they go through, they're not going to care about wanting to see any of that information. If they do, we'll provide them the copy, or the organization will provide them a copy, which again is best practice.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. I didn't expect us to go down this road, but I've learned a lot about this, uh, which I think will help us specifically with our employee hiring. But some people, I mean, the reality is the majority of the people that you're screening in the franchise development process are not going to get awarded a franchise. So there are a lot of people that may or may not want to see those. Now, let's go back to New York, California, Illinois, New Jersey, and who was the
New York
state?
City.
New York City.
So this is where it becomes frustrating for you and for us. When municipalities, which started about, I want to say, well, it's over probably 15 years ago, instead of just state laws happening, now we have municipal laws happening where a municipality will decide to take matters into their own hands. One of the big ones, actually, just as of this year, is I think, I want to say Philadelphia, you can't go back. 7 years is kind of the golden rule of how far back we usually go as a best practice to look at someone's records. We can go back further in many states, certain states not, they're restricted. But now, even though it was a 7-year rule for years and years, now we have one municipality that says, nope, you can only go back 5. No more 7. Well, now you're going to have other municipalities say, so now it's going to be all over the place in the future about how far back they'll allow you to look at a person's record to make a hiring decision, which is really frustrating. So again, you want to make sure that you're using a firm that understands all the laws and regulations statewide. So especially if you're in multi-state, so you're only getting reportable information because it is becoming very sophisticated on all these new laws and regulations.
It's got to be a nightmare for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
some of us are geeks and we love this information, so we track it daily. But it is becoming complex and not fair to employers based on the fact of all these municipal laws, like we just brought up NYC. New York City is passing a lot of new laws that are really, really not friendly to employers, and employers are going to leave New York City. That's what's going to happen.
Well, case study, just look at California,
Or California, where I am.
Yeah, well, they've tried to lead the way with some of these progressive ideas. And by the way, like I actually don't disagree with the idea of like let's protect the worker as far
Absolutely.
as it's without encroaching upon the rights of the employer. Like this is the
Right.
craziness of these laws. But I do feel. I mean, I know so many brands, hundreds of franchise brands that have told me we'll never make our franchise opportunity available in
Right.
California, New York. We don't care about the population centers. It's not, we can't operate in those states because
Right.
it's so risky for us as a business.
It is. There's a lot of the litigation that does come out of these two areas that
Yeah.
we track. I agree with being supportive of candidates to give them the right, but to me, ultimately, the employer should have the right, as long as it's non-discriminatory, to make their hiring decision based on what they want.
Right.
It's your business. So,
Yeah.
we're advocates for employers. We do support the hiring candidates, but at the same time, we really try to look at ways to reduce risk for employers because it has become very complex.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So many good insights today. I'm thinking about this last conversation we had about even now municipal laws that you've got to pay attention to,
Right.
and I know for a fact many franchise brands aren't aware maybe of some of
Right.
these rules and regulations that are now municipal level. Some of them might not even be aware of the restrictions at the state level. Fortunately,
Right.
those are a bunch of the registration states, so if they're staying out of those, they're pretty clear. But
Right.
is there a good resource you have on your website or something that people could
We
look at
have
that could see
we
all
have
of
a
this?
newsletter that we constantly publish information on how to reduce risk, the new laws that are coming out, and again, we're always around, as I know you are too, with helping and supporting, brands on how to reduce risk. If individuals give us the states they're in, we provide them with tons of articles and case law of what goes on. Recently, I'll give you one example: credit. Right? Especially for a franchisee screen, you want to make sure that they can afford being a franchisee. Uh, Franchisee credit or just consumer credit has become very tricky. Not for franchisee credit because there's an actual reason why, but we get calls once in a while wanting to do it on employees. And the answer is if they can't affect you financially, or you're in a state going back, let's take New York City again. New York City just passed a law that you cannot use employee credit anymore. Now, not franchisee credit, but employee credit. It's one of the first laws I've seen that says you cannot use it anymore. So usually there's exemptions if they can affect you financially. So CFO, right? If it's for employee screening for CFO, that makes sense. But if it's for someone who's not doesn't have access to credit cards and is just working for you, and then there's no reason to do credit. Credit's one of those, again, case by case by states that has a lot of state laws about how you can use it. So it's just really important to understand the
Mhm.
services you're using and how that could affect you. But again, rest assured that someone who's doing franchisee screening, credit is a big piece of that to make sure that they can afford it.
Yeah, that's wild, but good to know. Yeah. On the candidate side, it's pretty clear that you probably need to do a credit check because they have to qualify to get the meaningful amount of funds to buy
Yeah.
the
Right.
franchise and
So it
operate the
makes
franchise.
sense.
Yeah.
It's always good to put these things into policies too. So the more you can put into policy why you're doing things, the more you're protected if you're asked or requested that you have it in policy as to why.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Well, so Alan, I mean, guys, clearly Alan's got just a plethora of knowledge here that could help any franchise brand. If you guys are doing franchise recruiting right now, and you want to talk to Alan, Alan, what's the best way, or your franchise brand, you're trying to figure out the employment best practices for franchisees. Oh, in fact, I've got to ask one more question before I ask
Please.
for how people can reach you. Uh, Joint employer creates a lot of chaos. Hopefully, we can get this
Yes.
through this legislation through so we can codify it and it stops wishy-washies changing all the time. But a lot of these hiring best practices and guidelines and things that we've talked about that really apply, franchisors could compile and then share with their franchise owners. How much liability do they assume as a
Great
franchisor if they're
question.
sharing all of these best practices with franchise owners?
So that's a great question. And this is, of course, one of the big trends too, right? That you and I see, and that everyone I'm sure is listening that's in franchising sees. You have to be very careful and bring your legal in on anything joint employer. What we only share information with what we call the end user, which is the person making the hiring decision. So
Mhm.
if it's for a franchisee screen, it's corporate that can see the information and is allowed to see the information because we give appropriate forms and authorizations that the franchisees sign off on. It's part of the process.
Mhm.
If it's a franchisee doing employee screening, they need to be responsible for their screen. Many, unless it's a safety sensitive population that you have to require screening to be standardized, many just do a preferred relationship saying, look, this is an organization we work with. It's up to you to sign up with some organization, but we recommend this one, which is what we see many times with brands bringing us in as a preferred vendor. Unless it's, again, a patient touch, like a home health agency that's different, or some type of gym or fitness. So with those, with that said, it it is important to not share information other than if you have an addendum that you work out internally to see the information if there's audits that you do for your different franchisees. We don't share that information. We can do nominal reporting if someone wants to know how many locations are using us and how much they're using us, but it's just nominal. It's really important to keep that separated because of um, the joint employer issues.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a big factor right now in making sure you reduce risk by not sharing too much information versus if you are going to want information that you have something signed off on that it's approved by the candidate if you're
Mhm.
looking at candidate information and that individual franchise.
Wow. And that makes a lot of sense. Obviously,
Yeah.
don't push the data up or down. What if I'm the franchisor and I listen to this podcast and so I compile a memo. It just says, okay, these are all the insights I got from Alan Lasky and he was brilliant. Dr. Lasky shared all these great ideas, right? And they publish that information and then they send that to their franchise owners to say, guys, here are all the best practices about background screening and things like that. Is there any risk for them in that?
Sure. Again, just any law firm that I've done a webinar with, you want to put it's for informational purposes only. Please contact your
Your
legal.
attorney,
This is
yeah.
just for informational tools only. Just so at least you're providing information, right? We always want to reduce risk by providing information, but we always say defer to legal. There's a lot of legal. If you don't have in-house, there's a lot of legal agencies that work specifically in franchising. Some of us are going to IFA, the big franchise conference, and there's a lot of legal assistance there and support if you using outside counsel that can help you with that and reduce risk.
Mhm.
Again, it's insurance, so I get the fact that everything costs money, but doing that up front is extremely valuable later to protect your organization long term.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Great insights today, Alan. Man, I think we could keep going and going and going, but I feel like we've really captured probably a dozen great insights that people need to be paying attention to. If somebody said, "Hey, after hearing Alan speak about this, I really need to get some additional advice or feedback, or I'd like to talk," what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure, a couple ways. One is going to reliablebackground.com and contact us because that'll get to me, or just my email address, Alan, which is ALAN dot Lasky, which is LASKY at reliablebackground.com.
Awesome. Well, and guys, or come see him at IFA. LinkedIn, I know as well. I've connected with you there, but Alan's a great resource, as you can tell. And we sure appreciate you joining us on the Franchise Advisory Board, Alan.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and thank you for the time.